This morning we have a really interesting panel to present, and it's a group of young faith leaders, an imam, an Episcopal priest, and a rabbi, all working in their faith communities with millennials. And they're going to talk to us a little bit today about that group of people and what they're looking for in the faith. And I had the great honor of speaking to each one of them this week for about 45 minutes, and it was eye-opening to me, illuminating, because they're all coming from different backgrounds and different faith backgrounds, but they all spoke about the same phenomena affecting this group of young people. And I would like to introduce them first and then tell you a couple of those themes. We'll let them answer a few questions, and then we'll go to questions, as we usually do. So we have Imam Tarif Shriam, who is from the Islamic Community Center of Potomac, which is the mosque with whom we have established a relationship. And we have a couple guests here. Siti, are you here?
Yes. Here
I just want to say welcome to you. We have a couple of the ladies from the mosque who we've been meeting with who come today.
Siti's right there.
Siti, where are you?
She's right there.
There you are. Okay, great. And Tarif works at the Islamic Community Center of Potomac, but he's also the chaplain for the Muslim students at the University of Maryland. And then we have Becky Zartman. She's an Episcopal priest who is the chaplain for the Episcopal community at Georgetown University. And we have Rabbi Rami Schwartzer, who is a community minister. He works with about 12 different synagogues, but his community is without a building. It's a community of about 200 young people to whom he ministers, as we say in the Christian church. And it's a very innovative and interesting concept for reaching out to this group of young people. So what did I hear when I spoke to them this week about millennials? Well, first of all, I learned that contrary to a lot of the negative press that millennials get, they are an inquiring and discerning group, and all three of these faith leaders used words that really struck me. One of you said they're hungry. One of you said they're yearning. One of you said they're thirsty. They're seeking something spiritually. And I think we'll want to delve into a little bit what is it that they're seeking and not finding. The second thing I learned is that the millennials are living in a world that most of us can't understand. They're on the other side of the internet divide, and they're living in a world that is the internet age, social media, and all of the pressures as well as the possibilities that that offers. And that really affects their world. The other factor that affects their world is that they are living in this new stage of life that we've just recognized recently called emerging adulthood, or the in-between stage, or the Odyssey era, as Rami said. These are post-college, pre-family job young people who are still looking for their identity, seeking their life partner, seeking their life work, seeking their spirituality. So it's a very in-between and unstable and stress-filled time, but it's also a time full of possibilities. And the third thing that they all three mentioned from their different perspectives was how important it is that we start to understand the world of the millennials, that we start to understand their needs, and that our institutions adapt. If we don't adapt our approach to meet their needs, we will lose them. So those are three themes among many others that came out. But I think I'd like to start by throwing out the question, and maybe we'll start with you, Tarif. What is it that young people that you are working with at the University of Maryland very passionately, in a very engaged way, what is it that they're seeking? What is it that they're thirsty for? What are they looking for?
Sure. First, thank you very much, and in the church and our dear priest Sari, who's really a friend, and I honestly just love your company and the beautiful community that you've established here. So warm, it's so welcoming. Just being here just brings me to life, and so is the rest of the members of our congregation. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for your welcoming spirit, but also for taking on topics like this, right? Where many of us have already assumed we have the answers, right? And we dismiss other generations. Interestingly enough, so this morning we had a session at our mosque, and there are a few millennials there, students, high schoolers, college, but also the young professionals that have graduated. So one of them came up to me and said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm just preparing for a session." He said, "Yeah, the millennial one." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Yeah, I can't come." I said, "No worries. This is what we're going to be chewing on you." and saying essentially, you're the problem. We have it all figured out.
No,
We're gonna pin all the problems of life on you. And they busted laughing, him and his wife. I said, yeah, exactly. We're the actual, like the right generation. We're the wise generation. I'm Generation X. I don't know about you. We have baby boomers here, I guess. Generation X, we're the winners. They are the problem, right? That's a problem, right? And just the assumption that somehow we can make generalizations. We need generalizations to be able to tackle problems, but they have a ring of truth to them, but they hide a lot of realities, nuances, right, to that generation that if we miss out on, we're in serious trouble already, right, with them departing from organized religion.
They don't feel understood.
They don't feel understood, and they're diverse as well. They don't come in one form or one style or one way of thinking, but there are general things that we can see, and I've been seeing. It's a generation that really is looking, this is multivariate, because their world is complex. They're brought into it. They're really searching and looking for meaning, for meaningful relationships, meaningful, authentic community. Not just truth being thrown at them, not forced blind following, not rigidity, openness, open, caring spirit at the end of the day, and not for the truth to be thrown at them, right? They want to be challenged. They want to have their doubts and questions addressed in a respectful fashion. They want a space that welcomes them, that cares for their well-being, because they themselves are searching, and the stress on them is enormous. So I would say, as a starting point of the conversation, that's what I would say. There's a lot more to this, right? To this question of psychological, emotional well-being. But I'm going to say this: we cannot address that group of people, that demographic, if we don't understand their needs and their climate. Just as we as older adults, we have needs. We have a need for people to be grateful to us, to welcome us, to respect us, to show us compassion and affection, to help us address our doubts. They have the same issue, but it needs to be more relevant to their times.
Excellent introduction. And Becky,
Yeah.
I know that you're working, you've mentioned the same thing, the stress and the pressure on these young people, and how they're looking for relatedness and connection, and you're doing interesting work through your program, Inquiring and Discerning Hearts. But why don't I ask you to comment?
Sure. Is this on? Can y'all hear me? I don't have a... Anyway. Yeah, meaning, authenticity, all of those things are huge. They're huge. So one way that, what I've just started at Georgetown is we're running a pilot program about discerning who you are and what it means. Mm-hmm. And that has proved to be a huge hook. And not only that, it's not just, okay, I'm going to come in and tell you how to discern. Mm-hmm. We've set it up in small groups of 2 or 3, where they can come together and they meet weekly and talk to each other about these things.
So these are kids who may not be going to church. They're not walking through the doors of a church, but they're walking into your sessions and meeting with each other and with you.
Yeah, and they're asking, I've had a lot of people coming out of the woodwork this semester, friends of my students, roommates of my students, the ones who do come to church. And what's happening is they're coming and they're like, we need to talk about Me Too. We need to talk about the Harvey Weinstein thing, because I need somebody to talk to, and I'm not getting the answers someplace else. And so we sit down and we talk about it, and so my approach to this is just let it be led by the people I'm serving. What are their needs? I've never tried to make a program and force it down, but rather we start with listening to the needs of these searchers. These people are really trying hard to figure out who they are and how God fits into it all, and then respond to that.
Great. Yes, absolutely. Rami, I saw you shaking your head. I know you agree on this. So
I have to echo what Becky said, because, first of all, I need to admit I'm a millennial. Right? Rock on.
Barely 30, right?
Yes, exactly. Which maybe plays into how I do what I do and the fact that I do it to begin with. But I have to say that I bristle at the initial conversation. Anytime we're talking about them and how to get them in the door, whenever we other another population, we've already missed the mark. And not only that, but I think even if we talk about that in spaces that are not millennial spaces, that feeling echoes out into the crowd that we're trying to bring in. the irony is that the work that I do, which we can get into, is the generation of legacy institutions that I work with sort of refer to my project as the Jewish Millennial Engagement Project. And the irony of that is it uses every word that we shouldn't use, right? Because it's Jewish. That reminds me of Hebrew school, right? We don't want to be called millennials, and we certainly don't want to be engaged in something that somebody wants us to come to, right? So, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but also to point out that, as Becky said, we start bottom up instead of top down. I think it's also important that, we never talk about someone without someone. If we want to see more younger people, or any generation, or any population in our spaces, the first thing we need to do is actually walk out of that space and into theirs and build a relationship and a conversation.
And just let's do a little check here. Is there anyone here that would put themselves in the millennial category? Yay. Very good. So glad. Okay, thank you. Please, go on.
Yeah.
So just briefly tell them what you do in your project.
So I moved here a year and a half ago from New York. I spend half of my time, which is not relevant for this conversation, but working at a Jewish summer camp in Germantown. And with the rest of my time, I work in what I like to call a parallel process to our synagogues. It's not just a church problem. It's not just a mosque problem. We have a big gap in our generational populations in our synagogues, where we've discovered that synagogues are fabulous places for young families, preschool families, elementary school families, and for empty nesters and senior citizens. And then there's this block in between that we're not seeing anywhere, and that's
and you two see that also, right?
It's an engagement problem. It's what we don't talk about a lot. It's a fundraising problem, right? Because we're going to see, in 20, 30 years, see that the major philanthropy that supports our institutions isn't there because they weren't there when they were 20 and 30. And so what we decided to do was, rather than start saying, how do we get more millennials into our synagogues, we decided to run a parallel processor. So our synagogues are running Windows, and I'm running Macintosh. And what I mean by that is I'm doing something that is essentially what you would do in a synagogue, but not in a synagogue, not under the same name. So I operate mostly out of my home. And we try to promote a home-based Judaism. So much of Jewish life happens at home anyway. Shabbat, our Friday night celebration, is all home-based. One of our biggest holidays, Passover, it's not about going to synagogue. It's about having dinner at your table, asking questions, studying, community service, these kinds of things we don't need to do in a synagogue. So my ministry, in that sense, is out of my home. We have about a dozen people at our Shabbat table every Friday night, all in this population. I spend a lot of my time both at my house and traveling around the city, teaching Torah in small groups, one-on-one. I'll show up at people's offices and do a 1-hour lunch and learn with them. And we do community service together. And so we're hitting the three pillars of our faith of study, service, and community and holiday celebrations, all in one, without necessarily walking into a synagogue. And ultimately, the hope is potentially that they will one day join synagogues.
Or maybe synagogues will join them.
Or maybe synagogues, exactly, it's going to put it will join them.
Or churches or mosques.
But the basic premise, and it's still early in our work. I mean, I've been doing this a year and a half, and so we won't really see those kinds of effects for maybe 5 or 10 years. So part of it is thinking in the long term and trying to invest in skill building. If somebody feels that they have a relationship with a rabbi, they are comfortable in a Jewish space, it may change the way that they behave once they have children and are looking for a preschool or looking for a space for their community, because they won't be afraid of that space.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that
sure,
quick?
Of course.
So this is something I think about all the time, and this is one of the reasons I get out of bed in the morning, is because if you leave church in your 20s, and if you come back in your 40s, when you're 50, you've only got 30 years of church and then experience and growth under your belt. Like the church is going to be in a real hard spot when it doesn't have mature Christians in it, leading it and knowing how to discern and knowing how to lead communities and knowing how to listen to what God is actually calling them to do. And if there's this big hole there, that is not, and it doesn't need to look what it looks like now, but if it just stops, we're going to have a real problem in 20 years.
Well, I want to turn to Tarif on that, because you were talking about the critical importance of institutions adapting to the needs. And you mentioned that at least at your mosque, you see young people coming. They're coming. They're really inquiring, partly because of the difficult climate in America for Islam today. People are want to learn about it, but they're not staying and they're not engaging with the institution. Maybe you could talk about that.
Sure. So Muslim millennials are interesting. Sorry for using the word millennial.
No, it's okay. It's part of the
For lack of a better word.
It's the word, right? The word of the day. So interesting. They're facing and dealing with all the challenges that millennials, belonging to other faith traditions are facing. But on top of this climate of normalized bigotry and Islamophobia that is really weighing heavy on them. Where they're fully American, this young generation, they don't know any other place in their reality, and yet they're told by politicians and media, go back home, right? My wife had to deal with this. Where is home but here? This is home. So that complexity, that challenge, that really weighs heavy on you psychologically. And I have to deal with a lot of this in the spaces, right? I work on college campuses, and it's incredible what kind of pressures and stress they're going through. My wife has to wear the headscarf, and she's a physician. She has to deal with people looking at her weird, but yet she's the caretaker. And then when they get to know her, fascinating things come out, right? That ultimately are human beings. But it's incredible with this generation. It's actually, in the case of Muslims, I could speak for that, it's compelling them to go assert and find their faith. So we're not having actually the problem of Muslim millennials giving up on God. They haven't. On spirituality, they haven't. They've given up on religious institutions because they're not relevant. And they're very dogmatic and binary in their notion of the world. And it's all about right and wrong, black and white.
No questioning.
And there's shoving, no questioning. And you're not allowed to, not allowed. Many people, you have to accept the answer as is, don't question it, right? So we're limiting their options. We're not understanding their world. But they're not necessarily turning away from faith and God. And the climate they're in is forcing them, actually compelling them to really go assert it. You'll find on social media, many Muslim millennials, they're doing far better job than adults in explaining their identity, in communicating that out to the world to make them see who they are as Muslims, and yet as citizens that care for others around them. So it's been an incredible challenge, but an opportunity as well for them.
It is, definitely. Yeah. All of you spoke about the importance of social media, internet, living in that cyber world, the curated life on Facebook, et cetera, and the pressures that brings on a generation that's already seeking to identify itself. Could you address that a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that it may be obvious, but I think the biggest byproduct of growing up in an internet and social media age is just how lonely we are. You could have 1,500 Facebook friends and still feel like you don't have much community. Just a quick story about that I met with a young woman who, in her late 20s, and she emailed me to say, my mom told me about you and I should call you, so I'm here. Which I often get. So we met and had coffee, and she's like this the whole time, and she says, by the way, I don't know what this is. And I said, this isn't anything. Why did you write to me? And she said, I don't know. So she starts telling me about herself. She says, I've got this great apartment in DuPont Circle. I have this great real estate job that I do. I have a ton of friends. I'm out every night. I sometimes go to these cooking classes at the JCC. I said, wow, it sounds like life is really going great for you. And she said, yeah, but I'm bored. I said, that's what this is about, right? So they don't have the language necessarily, but I bring this up with social media because so much of what I do is not innovative, and it's very simple. We never have more than a dozen people at our Shabbat table on Friday night, because then you can have an intimate feeling. We have this Yiddish word called Hamish, right? Hamish means like close and warm, and getting a cup of tea by the fire, that's Hamish. And we need more Hamishness in our communities now.
More connection and relationality, yes. You're not.
No, go ahead if you want to say something.
I think millennials, because you've been raised, because I'm on the oldest cusp of this, actually. And so because you come of age in this, your BS meter is through the roof.
Yes.
Think about how many images you see every day, and if you're not glued to and think about how many images you see if you're glued to your phone. What comes, all the ads, all the images, all the people, and it's an extremely honed skill. And so what happens, I think this directly affects part of what I do at Georgetown is I just show them who I am, and I always tell them that I'm working really hard and I'm not perfect. Because what they see, like they're looking for something that is real, and they're looking for something that is not curated, and they're looking for something very, that you can touch and is tangible.
They don't want a sage on a stage.
Oh, no, like they would hate, like my students would be like, okay, Becky, come on, stop talking right now.
Right.
Like let's pass around the microphone and have a conversation about all the shared wisdom in the room.
So beautiful points. They see through things.
Yeah.
They see through things. They BS. They're like, you know what? We don't need this. We're out of here. I'm going to say something on social media deserves a panel and a discussion.
Yeah.
We're talking about cognitive decline. They're being damaged, right? Their brains are being damaged. Their psychology is being damaged. This is tremendous amount of research, and those are one of the areas that I've gotten into out of need. I had to understand what's happening to our brains with social media, and the jury's still out. They're doing the research. We're going to find in 30 years the significant damage to our brains because of this, not merely being open for me to find what my wife just texted me, but the presence of this smartphone by me affects my brain. I'm going to share a couple of things that I share with millennials because they need to understand, and I need to understand, my family needs to understand. Here's what this is doing to them. They're growing up in this. In my case, I was in my late teens until this came out. This is what they're accessing, and here's what this is doing. They've done research on mice, where they've actually had them to simulate the experience of switching from normal tasks to screen time. They expose them to light, and they put them in a maze. The mice that was exposed to the light constantly had a hard time getting out of the maze. Damage to the brain is happening because of screen time. And it's allowing the brain to secrete dopamine. They've studied the brains of people who are hooked on this, and it mimics the brain of someone who's addicted to alcohol and drugs. So they're addicted, they're retreating to this to hide away from their pain. It's fake, and many people have committed suicide. Look at their Instagram. They look amazing. They're looking happy. They're broken. I'm seeing a lot of people that are depressed, young people depressed. They're not understanding the impact of this on them, but that's their world. And it's producing, and I'm going to just at least mention one thing, what I would call institutionalized impatience. It's quick gratification. You want something? Go and buy it on Amazon. Food, right there, there's a restaurant, fast food. You want someone to like you, post an image and count the likes. What it's producing is also people who are looking for quick gratification and no patience to sit through a process, painful struggle of life, and build meaningful relationships. They're not getting this, by the way. We need to be the ones who plug them into this, make them understand what's happening to them just as it is happening to us right now. We're being damaged, and it's being wired into our heads. And this is the risks are severe, and we need to pay attention to it.
Thank you.
Can I just add very briefly? Sorry, rabbis talk too much, but I feel like one of the jobs I have is to show that our tradition is relevant. A lot of what I do is clean up from Hebrew school because Judaism is this far off, irrelevant thing. And when you talk about the smartphone and the addiction to smartphones, I have people say to me who don't observe Shabbat. I'm fully Shabbat observant, which means I don't use any electronics. I don't drive my car. I don't spend my money. I sort of live, I live an Amish day once a week, just to translate that. So when they're in my home and they see that, they say, "Oh my God, that's incredible. I need that." And I smile and say to them, "So do it. Turn your phone off right now."
Easier said than done.
they tremble a little bit. So I say to them that Shabbat has never been more relevant for the Jewish people than it is right now. Right. And the more that we can find the simple ways that our tradition all of our traditions are relevant and applicable and really affect us, right? Mm-hmm. That there's authenticity and truth to it.
And connection.
Exactly.
I mean, I want to give everyone here a chance to ask you questions. So let's just touch very briefly the chief point you would make about what our institutions need to do to reach this group and meet their needs and meet them where they are. Just one thing, and then we'll go to questions. One thing. Or two things. Just allow time for questions.
I would say, honestly, real, authentic representation of life. They need to see realness, sense realness in us, not somebody condescending, looking down at them, and build real relationships in real community. that is authentic, that is caring, that is not dogmatic into black and white, right? Kind of view of life. But also, this was reiterated earlier, they're not going to just come. You got to go to their spaces and build those relationships of trust. And look real. Don't look like someone who has it figured out. As a clergy, I want to look like I'm struggling. I don't have the answers.
That's what Becky
right?
said she does, right?
It really, when they sense your realness, oh my goodness, in an authentic way, they'll trust and they'll come with their questions. Because they're yearning for meaningful relationships.
Thank you.
For me, and I get to speak to a bunch of Episcopalians in here, be Christians. And I say that because I have a friend who is a war tax resistor. He earns less than $9,000 a year. He lives down in St. Mary's County. He's an Episcopal priest. He is just one of the most authentically Christian, Franciscan spirit type of humans you've ever met in your life. And his students won't leave him alone. They're so attracted to this beautiful vision of a different way to live. And when they sense that something is so true, there's nothing wrong with our tradition. That's not our tradition is not the problem. We need to go back to it and live in it and be real about it and listen to how God's calling us to be. And that's one thing, it's the hugest thing, but that is the single most important thing.
Thank you.
It's like back to basics, right?
That's right.
That's what I was going to say, back to basics. But I'll just add also that I said it before, we have to listen more. If we are telling our community what we have to offer them, then that goes against a lot of what we've been saying. Let's listen and see where somebody is starting, and make yourself available.
Okay. Well, thank you. You gave us so much to work with. So please, let's turn to questions, and I'll give my.
I wonder about I think we are also missing a generation, because it doesn't seem like their parents have a faith tradition that they've become a part of, so they didn't grow up with not just institutional faith-based, but just a community where their parents were active. So that's also, we've lost that generation, I think, as well. Would you speak to that? Is that?
Becky made that very point in our discussion. So please, Becky, why don't you take that one?
It is, well, the first thing is God does the converting, but we need to have people find us. And so if we're being authentic, people will be attracted to that and we'll start conversations. But also that's a huge gap. It's a huge problem. We have students, but they don't, okay, back it up. So, if you send your kid to Sunday school, okay, and you send your kid to every Sunday school session you possibly have, we were just talking about this, it's 1 hour a week, and it's not during the summers. It's less than 40 hours or so. An entire year is just 40 hours. That's less than 1 hour a week. We have to be doing faith at home things and being all of those things together, but the problem is the parents don't know it either. So I think something that institutional churches can do is be giving resources to families that they all learn together, and they all do those things together.
And you had mentioned to me the fact that the 60s generation kind of did lose Christian formation. And so the gap you're talking about, people who parents now who didn't attend Sunday school or didn't have a deep faith tradition in their growing up also need help, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question?
So, I don't know if this is a question about solutions or whether it's just a question about a phenomenon, but one of the things, I'm not a millennial, obviously. Surprise, huh? One of the words that comes to mind when you describe how you see the situation is disaffection. And the generation that I'm familiar with, there was a lot of disaffection, but it took the form or the outward expression of a huge amount of rejection of authority, rejection of the dominant culture, rejection of much of political life. And the positive expression was varied, but one of those expressions was something that Becky just hinted at, was this, going back to a much simpler way of life. It was communes, for example. So there was, in many ways, a communal answer, and also just in communal political action, there was a communal answer to that sense of rejection. It didn't include churches, by and large, except for alternative faiths. But I wonder if how you see the difference between the rejection that I've been describing in the 60s and whatever disaffection you have now, and whether there is any sort of underlying communal response.
Well, I'm not a sociologist, and I only claim to be one. But I think it's important to look at not one generation in a vacuum, but how they behave across 3 generations. If we look at history, and the history I know best is Jewish history, we see major changes every 3 generations. And that seems to be the magic number in history. Now, generations are getting bigger now, right? So it used to be maybe 70 years was 3 generations, and if you look through history, you'll see trends, especially in Jewish history, of things changing every 70 to 100 years. I think we have to look at that across the generations. What I'm about to say may be specifically a Jewish phenomenon in this country, though I'm hearing that there's parallel. But I'm more or less the 3rd generation to be in this country after World War II. After a mass exit, or shortly before that, after a mass exodus from Europe. And that has a huge effect on how young Jews are behaving, because of how our parents behaved also. So that disaffection is, I bring this up because I'm not sure that it's necessarily about a function of disaffection, as it is that disaffection is a symptom of something larger we have to understand. When my grandparents were building their lives here, before there were big Jewish institutions in this country, they were trying to bring over a sense of Europe, but also be very American. And their kids then learned to be very American. And now I'm seeing that we are the product of 2 generations trying to be very American and less nebbishy Eastern European Jews. And all of a sudden, there's this yearning to go back. So there's a disaffection, yes, absolutely. And I think so much of how we have to think about this is specific to millennials, and so much of it is, as you're pointing out, that every generation likes to tear down institutions and build their own. We and this generation of the 60s are actually not very different, but we still don't want to do what our parents did. So I'm not sure that answers it for you. I hope to give a little bit of a bigger picture.
Tarif, I think you had something.
Sure. This is the complexity of the world that we're living in now. Multitude of choices. So right now, if they find authoritative structure, and all of us, we want to reject authority, right? But it's happening more so rigidity, right? They're in a world, secularized world, first of all. I mean, if you want to simplify the conversation, one of the biggest challenges that the younger generation is dealing with, grappling with, even older generations, is even the notion of undermining God altogether, right? Secularism is real. Materialism is real. And if you don't have the right framework to address those questions about even the existence of God, matter and energy, they'll throw you out. Because they're now in philosophy classes, right? And a discourse that argues for materialistic explanation for things, and they're now saying this whole notion of God is unreal. It's backward, it's out of fashion, so on and so forth. And here's what happens, where I want to go to in terms of not necessarily rejecting. If they don't find meaning, if they don't have those experiences that makes them taste spirituality and the fulfillment of that experience, they have gazillion other choices. Go Google, right? Yeah. Go find a community. Now, all kinds of communities have sprung up to provide them with a space for friendships, for meaning, for purpose, for something living bigger than you. So they're saying, sorry, see ya. I have gazillion other choices to go to beyond the experience of the home of worship that is so rigid and so irrelevant. It is not even allowing me to ask my questions. So I would say part of it is rejection, but also part of it is multitude of choices in a world of digital information that is at your fingertips, gazillion ideologies, and now the cross-cultural interactions. We're not in a world where it's hard to connect with other cultures, other ideas, ideologies, at your fingertip, in your bedroom, in their bedroom. Our children are in gazillion communities right now. You cannot shelter them anymore. The neighborhood has disappeared, but there are alternative communities that are springing up all over, and if we're not paying attention, they're in a dangerous world.
And all three of you mentioned the toxic side of this, the dangerous side of this. One of you said it's a knife that can cut both ways, because people lacking a meta-narrative in their lives, as you said, are looking for it online. And sometimes what they find, I think you used the word toxic religion. So I don't know if you want to add to that before we take the next question.
Oh, yeah. At the church where I adjunct, St. Thomas DuPont Circle, we talk about bad churched. It's just like this idea of being spiritually abused is a real problem. But to talk about the communal kind of question, I don't think millennials and boomers are that far apart, actually. Like, I don't. We're grappling with the same things. We're watching the world shift under our feet and trying to make sense of it in a real way, except I think things are just a little faster now. And they move faster, and the way people communicate move faster. And it's all very fraught with, it's just very easy to stray off the narrow path now. And to just briefly follow up on your comment, the church can't be a Kiwanis club, because there are already really awesome Kiwanis clubs, or, or country clubs, or all these other kinds of things that you can join. The kickball league, who knows about the kickball league in DC? No, it's huge. This is like, if you want community, go play kickball. That's where people go to find dates. It's where they go to find friends. It's where kickball is huge. And so they're gonna go play kickball because it's way more fun.
That's true.
But it's not meaningful, because there's not a faith component. So be faithy. Be faithy.
Well, I want to add a piece to this. I don't know if anybody has, maybe either of you has read some studies coming out of Harvard Divinity School called How We Gather. Incredible pieces that you should read. Two unlikely candidates for Divinity School describe themselves that way, Casper DeTwiel and Angie Thurston. They looked at the Pew Report of Religion in America in 2013, and they said, all these people who identify as none, that's N-O-N-E, of course, where are they? How are they spending their time? We're in church all day, right? So what are they doing? And they found them at CrossFit. And they studied CrossFit, and then subsequently studied another 24 organizations like this. And they interviewed people at CrossFit, and they said, what do you love about CrossFit? And people said, well, one thing I love is that when you don't show up, somebody calls you and says, where were you? We missed you. And the second thing I love is that afterwards we all go out and we eat paleo together. Like And the third thing they said is anywhere in the world on the same day, they're doing the same workout in their CrossFit box. How cool is that? So I thought to myself, wow. And so Casper and Angie thought, that's accountability, dietary laws, and liturgy, right? It's church. So the crazy thing is they brought together the CEO of CrossFit, they brought together a bunch of these other organizations, and they brought them to Harvard Divinity School with their professors and said, talk about the new church in America. It's incredible, it's great reading. And the last thing I'll say about it is that the amazing piece, when you talk about bring God back into the equation and be more faithy, they identified 7 qualities of these non-church churches. And number 7 was what they called something else. And the story they tell is about sitting in a circle of people who are having a deep conversation. And one person stood up and said, wait, stop. This, whatever's happening, is awesome, and I want to feel more of this. And they didn't know how to call it, right? They said, there's something else going on. Well, we know what to call it, right? That's the G-man, right? But I think we don't have a language for it. When I talk to Jews who hate talking about God, right? We can say that there's only one God, but we don't believe in him. That's like a very Jewish thing to say. It's because we think of some image that's so, that's sort of an abused spirituality. We have to change the conversation. People tell me all the time, I'm not religious. I'm really spiritual, though.
Yeah. That's true. Maybe we have time for 2 more questions, I think. Spiritual but not.
Right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I think I might be on Becky's. I'm on the older end of the millennial generation, and if you could call me that. And from my experience, there is a compartmentalization that occurs. So we have our professional lives, our personal lives, and then it's sort of like there's certain things that you may not be able to bring up in a religious setting, so to speak. You sort of have to have I don't know how to call it, like a front, or things that you can say with your friends on social media, but you may not be able to bring up at mosque or a church or synagogue or other temple you may go to. And so, my question to all of you is how can these religious institutions help people, adhere to the tenets of their faith, but at the same time look and learn how to accept others who may feel or think differently? I'll give you an example. When the ruling on same-sex marriage came down the Supreme Court, there was a lot of discussion on social media. It's like, well, it's about time we accept that these are relationships that people are having. But then how do you help people sort of grapple with, there's the religious tenets, but then there's the reality of what they're living and seeing out, so I think that's the question. It's sort of like, how do you help people not compartmentalize, like for Shabbat or for, like Sunday morning, Friday afternoon?
So for me, I believe the cardinal virtue that the church must embrace in order to continue to be the church is humility. Because we need to see ourselves for who we actually are, because only then can we love ourselves and love other people. When we see ourselves as who we are, which are beloved children of God, and no more and no less, and not any more than anyone else, when we start to see and we can start to finally embrace those parts of ourselves that are hard to talk about, everything gets more real. Humility, I think that is like, you just gotta, it's hard work. It's real hard work, but it's hard work that we have to do. And I'll say that all day long. We gotta see who we are and then be who we are and be who we're called to be.
Terry, you wanted to say something?
Sure, same beautifully put. If we're not being real, if we're not being compassionate, these are the fruits of faith ultimately, and humble. I love this word, humility, presence, because if you don't begin a conversation with first this humble openness, right, to the reality that we're in, how are we going to build a relationship where you can actually now speak about the bigger questions, right? And even the issues of faith and where it fits into your life. But if we're not going to be open to address the wound, so if you have somebody with an injury and they're bleeding, you don't go talk to them about God, right? You gotta drop everything and go attend to the wounds, address that need, their brokenness in there, and that's what I do most of the time. Really, I say put faith aside. Faith is about being real in life and tackling the real issues of life and being human, and it's messy. But if I'm not going to talk to you about this in an authentic, intentional way, though, not to get to something, they see through that. Right? Oh, I'm going to use you to, kind of have that conversation with you, but at the end, I want to convert you, right? They'll see through that. How about being present for them, compassionate, and really struggling together to find answers? Faith gives us a framework. It's about ethics, it's about values, but you're not going to go to those questions and allow them to really see perhaps a certain lesson that you want them to see without the initial humble presence, compassionate presence that address their psychological and emotional needs for even talking, right? So those are critical, and I can't emphasize enough to get to the next set of questions in life, right?
Wow. Well, actually, I think we've run out of time, and I think that's a wonderful point on which to end. And so please join me in thanking